Hey everybody, it's Alex from Alex and Autos out here for my good friend Rome and Micah again, and today I am actually in my driveway. Thanks to the ongoing global pandemic, the launch for the 2021 Toyota Mirai has been a little bit different than normal, and I'm one of the few people, fortunately in California, that's been able to get their hands on this and drive it back to back with my very own hydrogen fuel cell car, my Hyundai Nexo. But I'm not here to talk about the Nexo, I'm here to talk about the Mirai, because this is quite a polar change for Toyota. Not only is this infinitely better looking than the current generation Toyota Mirai, this is the first production rear-wheel drive fuel cell vehicle. You might be wondering, why is there an LS500 lurking in this shot? The reason is that this Mirai is the close cousin to the current generation Lexus LS. That's why this is now a rear-wheel drive vehicle, and that's why this has that much longer hood, sexy proportion that you see right in front of you. In addition to improving the driving dynamics of the Mirai, there is a practical reason for going rear-wheel drive. In my initial testing out here in Northern California, I was able to get 0 to 60 in 9 seconds flat with this model. That's pretty similar to the Hyundai Nexo and the Honda Clarity. But this has a very different feel than the Clarity or Nexo, because this is rear-wheel drive, and this really does feel like a Lexus LS out on the road. This has the cushiony, soft ride that you'd expect out of a Lexus. It has the perfect 50-50 weight balance that you'd expect in a modern Lexus, and that rear-wheel drive delivery. It's hard to talk about green vehicles without talking about Tesla, of course. So versus the Model 3 or the Model S, this has a much plusher ride to it. There's definitely more body roll, more tip and dive than we find either in the Model S or the Model 3. Both of those vehicles, I suppose you could call corollaries to this. This is about the same size on the outside as the Tesla Model S. On the inside, the Tesla Model 3 seems to be a little bit roomier in the back seat than we find in the Mirai, but this is going to be a lot more comfortable of a driving car than either of those models. And the range figures are probably going to be a little bit closer to reality if my own experience owning a hydrogen vehicle is anything to go by. There's so much more energy available to this vehicle with the over 5 kilograms of hydrogen that we have on board. That is just simply more energy than you have in a Tesla Model S or Tesla Model Y battery pack. Another thing that I've noticed about hydrogen fuel cell vehicles is that the way range drops when you're climbing hills or you're going at higher speeds on the open highway is an awful lot more like a gasoline vehicle and a lot less like a comparable electric vehicle. So in real-world driving, this is probably going to be closer to the 400-mile mark than the 400-mile version of the Tesla Model S. The platform designed for the LS and the LC, and now of course the Toyota Mirai, was designed to accommodate larger engines than we find in the Prius platform, or even if they'd used something like the Camry platform. You see, the LC has a 5-liter V8, the LS has a twin-turbo 6, and this fuel cell stack occupies about the same amount of room under the hood as either of those engine options. This is an all-new fuel cell stack. It's been shrunk versus the previous generation stack, and it now lives entirely under the hood. I know that sounds weird, but the previous generation fuel cell stack for the Mirai actually lived partially under the body compartment as well. This fuel cell stack is about 25% smaller than the previous generation stack, and it uses fewer cells, 330 versus 370. That reduces the cost of production. It also reduces the amount of raw materials, especially expensive materials like platinum, that are used in fuel cell construction. Even though this has shrunk, power output has gone up from 114 kilowatts to 128 kilowatts. At the moment, that makes this the most powerful fuel cell that you can buy in North America right now. This is about 30% more powerful than the fuel cell that we find in the Hyundai Nexo. It's also a little bit more powerful than the fuel cell that we find in the Clarity. With hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, there are definite similarities to a battery electric vehicle because the motor is the only thing driving this down the road. It's a 182 horsepower electric motor, produces 221 pound-feet of torque, and it seems to be borrowed out of a Lexus RX hybrid, only instead of being in the front, it's of course located in the rear. But you could also think of this as a hybrid vehicle because this has a hybrid-sized 1.5 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery pack in the rear. The reason for that is when you're commanding 182 horsepower out of this electric motor, the fuel cell stack cannot produce that much oomph. So the remainder of the oomph comes from the battery pack in the rear. It blends the power sources together and gives you 182 horsepower. Logically, as with a regular hybrid, if you're going up a really steep grade, say the Continental Divide, or you're going up to the Sierra Nevada, there is going to be a point where that battery pack is drained and all you have is the power coming from the fuel cell. So you will notice a little bit of a performance difference if the battery pack is completely depleted, but that's unlikely to happen unless you're really flogging it up those steep hills. Now that is a situation that I've encountered with my own Hyundai Nexo, so it's not entirely theoretical. It absolutely will happen in vehicles like this. But you will also see a bit of a performance difference in higher altitude in a regular gasoline engine. So the difference is not too far off what I've experienced in gasoline engines at around 10,000 to 11,000 feet of elevation. Even though there's less oxygen available at altitude, according to Toyota, there's still enough for this fuel cell stack to be producing its maximum power at any height that you will achieve in North America. At the moment, a lot of hydrogen is coming from the steam reformation of natural gas, and a lot of that industrial hydrogen production seems to be happening in the southern part of the US. That's part of the complaint against hydrogen fuel cell vehicles from a wide variety of groups out there, mainly battery electric adopters. Now, a lot of new hydrogen stations being built in California right now are going to be 100% renewable. The source of that renewable hydrogen is a lot closer to where it's being dispensed, so that's going to eliminate some of that drama. And we're seeing a transformation in the way that hydrogen is stored at stations. An important thing to know about fuel cell vehicles is that driving one of these around is like driving a prototype or concept car around, because there just isn't the same kind of infrastructure that we even see with electric vehicles out there for hydrogen cars. Now, the infrastructure does seem to be experiencing some pretty rapid growth. There are a ton of new hydrogen stations planned and under development in my local area. San Jose is getting another few hydrogen stations. That's the third largest city in California. So there's definitely going to be some progress there coming up soon. But San Diego, the second largest city in California, does not have very many hydrogen stations going on. Apparently at the moment, it's really just one. At just under 196 inches long, the Mirai is definitely shorter than the Lexus LS 500, and most of the difference happens in the rear. We get shorter rear doors, we get less of a rear overhang, and a smaller trunk. Also a bit more of a fastback or sportback style. To be honest, I was really surprised that Toyota didn't try and emulate the formula of the Hyundai Nexo, because this is sort of a crossover come hatchback design. It has about double the cargo capacity in the rear. We get a little bit more legroom on the inside and certainly more rear passenger headroom than we find in the Mirai. According to Toyota, they wanted the Mirai to be more than just a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. They wanted it to be sexy, they wanted it to be modern, they wanted it to handle well. And of course, it's also targeted at markets outside the United States. That's another reality. In the United States, California and Hawaii are the only places with hydrogen fueling stations that are commercially open to the public. So if you want a Mirai and you live in North Dakota, that could be a bit of a problem. Outside of California and Hawaii, there is a hydrogen filling infrastructure in Canada, all across Europe, South Korea, and of course, especially Japan as well. And in a number of those markets, sedans are a little bit more popular, especially if you're going to be spending big bucks on your next car. That's another reason that we end up with a sedan. The rear end styling of the Mirai definitely reminds me of the Lexus. That makes a lot of sense because the Mirai has a pretty high sticker price. We don't know the exact pricing just yet, but this is probably going to be around $60,000. Of course, as I'm going to talk about later, you won't actually pay $60,000 for a new Mirai. The styling is a little bit different than what we find in the LS, but there are a lot of luxury touches like full LED tail lamp modules, something that I really appreciate, and then sort of an homage to exhaust tips down below. Hydrogen fuel cell vehicles do have an exhaust. They exhaust air and water from the fuel cell stack, but that actual exhaust happens up front in the Mirai rather than in the rear. Let's go for a spin around the interior. We are in the XLE trim, not the limited trim, so we don't have a panoramic moonroof. One odd thing that I noticed is that we have a bump up in the ceiling right here and then a bump down. It's like there's a structural member from the B pillar to the B pillar in the vehicle that will cut down headroom if you're a taller person and you have that seat in the position you see the passenger seat in right there. We have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger. Soft-Tex upholstery, not leather upholstery, of course, because this is an eco-focused vehicle. If you get the limited trim, the upholstery would be perforated because the front and second row seats would be heated and ventilated. In this model, just the front seats are heated. We had a lot of soft-touch materials, more of that soft-Tex trim going on the doors and on the dashboard. This definitely has a very Lexus build quality to it going on inside, but as you can see moving over to the dashboard, definitely a very Toyota style to it. So we have the same infotainment system that we find in the Highlander. You can swap the CarPlay integration from side to side by pressing that little button right there. You can see you can swap it from left to right. We have dual zone climate control in this model, tri-zone climate control in the top end version. Joystick style shifter here, very Prius-like in its operation, drive mode and snow mode right there, electric parking brake, 2 cup holders, Qi wireless charging mat, and then since one of the hydrogen tanks is right here under the center console, we have kind of a small storage area there in the middle, and you can really see how big this hump is if you look down there towards the rear. Console's pretty wide, and you're definitely straddling that hydrogen tank if you're sitting in that 5th seat back there. There's an engine start-stop button. We have a smaller LCD for the instrument cluster. I think this was a good trade-off. If I were to choose, I would definitely take a smaller LCD cluster and a larger infotainment screen. And then we have a steering wheel that looks again sort of like a blend of Toyota and Lexus. This reminds me a lot of the LS500 steering wheel. That's quite logical because it's the same steering column. It's even powered in this model. The best corollary to vehicles like this, the Nexo and the Clarity, really is not the Tesla Model S, arguably the first high-volume battery electric vehicle that was specifically designed for that purpose. It's not even arguably the Tesla Roadster. It probably would be something like the very first generation RAV4 EV, one step above the first production vehicle, which would have been the General Motors EV1. So that's really important to keep in mind. Fuel economy is a little bit difficult to talk about with a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. This has spent so much time idling as I've been filming it, shooting it, etc., that we've been averaging 50 mpge. That is definitely below what the EPA says you should be getting. MPGE is a way to try and compare vehicle to vehicle. So you'll notice that battery electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid vehicles, and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles give you MPGE. Now let's dive into the pricing. Rather unfortunately, Toyota announced pricing literally 20 minutes after the car was taken out of my driveway. For 2021, it's going to be significantly less expensive than the outgoing model at $49,500. That's a $9,000 price cut. If you want the limited trim, that's not the one I was driving today, that would be $66,000. Pricing gets a little bit tricky when we start talking about tax credits, incentives, rebates, all that kind of stuff. There's going to be an $8,000 federal tax credit that functions very similarly to the ones that we find on battery electric vehicles, but the legislation is a little bit different. So that expires at the end of calendar year 2020, although it may get renewed for 2021. California also offers a $4,500 rebate for fuel cell vehicles. Funding for that appears to be extending through 2021, although again, details are a little bit sketchy about exactly when that transformation will happen. Toyota also tosses in a $15,000 hydrogen fuel card with the purchase or lease of any new hydrogen vehicle. That's definitely enough to get you through the average 3-year lease period. Depending on exactly how you want to look at the Mirai, you could say that the effective price after all of that put together is around $22,000. But of course, if you were to buy a Mirai, you would have to pay for the hydrogen after that 3-year fuel card has been used up. And at the moment, operating a hydrogen fuel cell car is about the same expense as operating something along the lines of a V6 Camry. Now, if you were to lease it, there are 2 subsidized lease offers, one for $499 and one for $549 for the limited trim, plus $2,500 due at signing. If you were to crunch the numbers there and compare this to a number of battery electric vehicles, this could be less expensive to keep around because they're going to pay for the fuel over that lease period. Bottom line on the Mirai, if you're looking for one of the most interesting new vehicles available in California or possibly Hawaii at some point soon, then you should definitely put the Mirai on your shopping list. But keep in mind that hydrogen supply is somewhat limited. Hydrogen fueling stations don't exist everywhere. In the county that I am filming this in, there is no hydrogen fueling station. So with lots of caveats, if you live in California, if you live near a hydrogen fueling station, and if the hydrogen lifestyle works for you, then the Mirai is an excellent option. Again, I personally have a Hyundai Nexo, and my lease is going to be up in about 12 months. I've been asking myself today, would I get the Mirai over the Nexo if I had to do this all over again? If this Mirai existed, I think it would be a really, really tough choice. Now, the main reason I got the Nexo is for the cargo area, to be perfectly honest, and that is not replicated in this Mirai. But if you want the rear-wheel drive dynamics, this really does have a great driving nature to it out on the road. If you're looking for something that looks an awful lot sexier, an awful lot more unique, then obviously there is the Toyota Mirai. And this is currently the best-selling hydrogen fuel cell vehicle in North America. I expect that's going to continue. Be sure and let me know what you think about all that in the comment section. Smash the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. You can find me over at facebook.com/AlexDottos, over at youtube.com/AlexDottos, all those other social places, and perhaps I'll see you in another TFL video coming up soon.